Have you ever woken up between 3 and 5 in the morning without knowing why? Have you felt a presence, an intuition, or an inexplicable emotion that seemed to arise from deep within you, as if the entire universe were silently calling you? What if I told you that this moment is no coincidence? What if there were an ancestral, energetic, and spiritual reason why many women, in secret, repeat a specific prayer right at that time, and those who say it experience things that science still cannot explain? What you are about to hear is not just a story. It's a possibility, a portal, a hidden message that has survived the passage of time and that today, thanks to the teachings of JACOBO GRINBERG, begins to be revealed. JACOBO GRINBERG was a Mexican neurophysiologist, psychologist, and mystic who dedicated his life to investigating the mysteries of human consciousness. But he was not just any academic. Grinberg crossed a line between science and the invisible. He delved into shamanic knowledge, studied with authentic shamans, documented phenomena others preferred to ignore, and formulated one of the most revolutionary theories of modern thought, the theory of synergy. In it, he proposed that reality is not what we perceive with the senses, but a mental construction that depends on how we organize the information we receive. This seemingly abstract proposal holds a direct connection to what many women do between 3 and 5 in the morning. But what does Grinberg have to do with a secret prayer? And why specifically women? The answer leads us to understand not only the role of feminine consciousness in higher spiritual processes, but also the existence of a symbolic, subtle language that activates precisely when the world sleeps. That prayer, more than words, is an act of vibration, an energetic code that, when emitted at that time, coincides with a unique moment of the body, mind, and environment. The brain wave cycle is at its most receptive point. The Earth's magnetic fields decrease their activity, and intuition, that which Grinberg considered a higher form of knowledge, becomes more intense. Before we continue, I want to ask you something very important. If topics like these intrigue you, if you've ever felt that the universe speaks to you through signs, or if you simply wish to understand more about the power of feminine consciousness, subscribe right now to the channel and activate the notification bell. This content has been created for those who, like you, are willing to look beyond the obvious, to listen to what is not always said out loud, and to connect with something much deeper. We are not only going to talk about science or spirituality, but about how both intertwine to reveal a forgotten truth. Also, by subscribing, you become part of a community of seekers that grows more and more every day. You are not alone on this path. You are with us. Returning to the central theme, you should know that between 3 and 5 in the morning, a very peculiar phenomenon occurs. Buddhist monks call it the hour of spiritual awakening. In Catholicism, it is associated with the so-called hour of mercy. In pre-Hispanic cultures, it is a time when spirit watchers walk among the living. And in traditional Chinese medicine, that time frame corresponds to the lung meridian, an organ related to deep sorrow, the soul, and the connection to existence. The coincidences are not random. They are patterns. The most striking thing is that in many stories collected by Grinberg, especially in his encounters with wise women, healers, grandmothers, midwives, and teachers from native communities, there appears a consistent practice, the repetition of a special prayer, not written in books, but passed on orally and recited precisely when the world is asleep. This prayer is not a plea, nor a desperate request. It is an affirmation, an activation, an act of remembering what we are, what we were, and what we can be. The message of this video goes beyond mere curiosity. It is an invitation to experience for yourself, to try, to reconnect with your feminine energy, whether you are a woman or not. We all have polarities. And honor that sacred moment that happens when no one else is watching, because that prayer has profound effect. It transforms, elevates, aligns. And I'm not saying this just because of the dozens of testimonies we received, but because even from neuroscience, as Grinberg proposed, what we think, feel, and say restructures our perception of reality. What is activated at 3:33 in the morning, for example, is not just a creepy time for horror movies. It is a symbolic number that, according to numerology, represents spiritual balance and higher guidance. And what do the women who practice this prayer say? They say their dreams become clearer, that they feel the presence of their ancestors, that their intuition sharpens as if an inner compass awakens, that certain decisions long blocked become untangled, that the inexplicable sadness accompanying them for weeks disappears. And sometimes, right after finishing the prayer, they feel a wave of peace so deep that they cry, not from pain, but from relief. This video is made for you if you've ever wondered why you feel different during the early morning. If you ever had the urge to pray, meditate, or write at that hour without knowing where that desire came from. If you've ever felt that there is something beyond the tangible and you're looking for a concrete way to connect with it. Here, you won't find empty superstitions or baseless theories. Here you'll find a bridge between ancestral wisdom and modern discoveries, between deep spirituality and the science still trying to decode it, between JACOBO GRINBERG and your own consciousness. Throughout the video, we'll explore in detail who JACOBO GRINBERG was and why his studies remain relevant even after his mysterious disappearance. We'll see what really happens between 3 and 5 in the morning from both an energetic and scientific view. You'll learn exactly what the secret prayer is, how it's transmitted, how you can adapt it to your life, and what symbolic elements it includes. We'll also share testimony from women who claim to have transformed their lives by integrating this practice into their daily routine. And finally, we'll talk about what science has been able to explain or not about the phenomena, always remembering that truth, as Grinberg said, is not outside, but in the very structure of your experience. So get ready. This is not just an informative video. It is a journey into the invisible, the powerful, and the sacred. It's a tribute to the women who pray in silence while the world sleeps. To those who awaken without knowing why, but heed the call, and to those who are ready to remember what their soul already knows. If you are one of them, stay until the end. This journey may change the way you see the night and life. JACOBO GRINBERG was not a common scientist. He didn't speak with rigid formulas or hide behind inaccessible language. His search was different. The truth beyond the obvious. He was born in 1946 in Mexico City in a home marked by early loss. His mother died when he was only 12 years old. That experience marked him deeply, not only because of the pain, but because it was due to that tragedy that he became interested in the workings of the mind and consciousness. He began asking questions many avoided. What happens after death? Where does consciousness go? Are we only matter, or is there more? From a young age, he showed unusual intelligence and an almost obsessive interest in consciousness. Not in the mind as a simple neurological process, but as a vibrant, expansive field capable of altering reality itself. This curiosity led him to study psychology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, where he quickly stood out for his insight. He later moved to the United States, where he studied physiology and neuropsychology at New York University. There, he came into contact with the most advanced neuroscience of his time, with top laboratories, quantitative methods, rigorous experiments, and highly rational approaches. But something didn't add up. Though he understood how neural connections worked, the brain's biochemistry, brain waves, and synaptic structure, he felt something essential was missing from that map. There was a persistent intuition pulling him to another field. Mysticism, shamanism, the ancestral practices that seemed, to the academic world, primitive or superstitious, but that in his direct experience manifested results conventional science couldn't explain. That curiosity led him to seek answers where other scientists dared not look. He began closely studying Mexican shamans, particularly those who worked with healing techniques and altered states of consciousness. He traveled to remote communities, lived with healers, documented oral practices, initiation rites, energetic cleansings, and he did so not from academic distance, but through real immersion. He didn't go as Dr. Grinberg, but as a student ready to unlearn. One of the most striking figures in his path was Barbara Guerrero, better known as Pachita, a woman considered by many as a psychic surgeon. She was capable of performing surgical procedures without a scalpel, extracting organs with her hands, and transplanting invisible tissues. To the eyes of traditional medicine, that was absurd, mere theatrics. However, Grinberg witnessed it on multiple occasions and documented his experiences in an extraordinary book titled Pachita, where he describes the surgery step by step, the mental states the healer induced, and immediate effects on patients. It was not a case of collective hallucination or suggestion. What Grinberg saw with his own eyes led him to ask a question that would forever transform his career. What is reality? And who defines it? That's how he began developing his most revolutionary theory, the theory of synergy, a made-up word, yes, but one with monumental conceptual weight. For Grinberg, the brain does not capture reality like a camera. There is no external copy that we simply reproduce in the mind. Instead, he proposed that reality is a field of energy full of information, which he called the neural field, and what we perceive of the world depends on how that field is organized by our neural network. In other words, reality is a cerebral construction. There is no objective outside that we all see the same way, but rather a kind of quantum matrix where each human being organizes a universe uniquely. This model breaks with the idea that there's only one reality. According to Grinberg, each person lives in their own synergetic reality, and those realities can expand, interconnect, or even collapse if the way information is organized is altered. This means that what you call a problem, someone else may experience as a lesson. What you see as a limit, another might see as a possibility. Everything depends on the field from which you organize your perception. Here comes a fascinating point. According to Grinberg, when a person enters states of deep meditation, performs spiritual practices, or utters certain prayers with intention, an expansion of the neural field occurs. That expansion modifies the structure of perception. It's not just about seeing more clearly, but about accessing levels of reality that are normally hidden. In simple terms, if you live trapped in a network of limiting beliefs, you will see a limited world. But if you open your mind, if you expand your consciousness, you access deeper and subtler realities. This concept, although it sounds esoteric, has a scientific basis. Grinberg carried out numerous experiments with electroencephalograms, brain mapping, and recordings of neuronal activity. He observed how certain mental states, induced by meditation, repetition of mantras, visualization, or shamanic practices, generated coherence between the brain's hemispheres. This synchronization, according to him, opened the door to accessing the synergetic field, a dimension where everything is interconnected and where thought can shape matter. What was revolutionary about his approach was that he didn't ask you to believe blindly. It wasn't about faith without foundations. Grinberg showed you how your perception could be altered with concrete exercises, how the brain reconfigures, how rituals, far from being empty superstitions, were precise tools for accessing other realities. And above all, how feminine consciousness, intuitive, connected, circular, had a natural sensitivity to open those doors. This feminine sensitivity was a recurring theme in his research. Grinberg claimed that feminine energy, often repressed by centuries of rationalism and patriarchy, was closer to the language of the synergetic field. While the masculine mind tends to categorize, analyze, and divide, the feminine integrates, feels, and connects. That's why, he said, many women experience paranormal phenomena, accurate intuitions, lucid dreams, and mystical visions more frequently. Not by chance. The majority of people who participated in his expanded perception studies were women. But talking about perception is not the same as talking about hallucinations. Grinberg made a clear distinction. A hallucination is a construction without coherence with the real field. Expanded perception, on the other hand, is a broader capture of that field. That's why he affirmed that the invisible is not illusory, but simply beyond our ordinary perception, and that with practice, that perception could open, just like a flower opens to the morning sun. This approach earned him the respect of many and the rejection of just as many others. For some, he was a genius ahead of his time. For others, a madman who mixed science with spiritualism. However, his work was so rigorous, so well documented, that even his detractors could not deny its impact. He published more than 50 books, many of them now impossible to find, as they were distributed in closed circles or withdrawn after his disappearance. And this is where the mystery thickens. Because JACOBO GRINBERG did not die. He disappeared. Literally. One day he stopped answering calls. Didn't show up to his classes. His house seemed frozen in time. The authorities began a search, but there were no traces, no footprints, no signs of escape, not a body, nothing, only emptiness. And from then on, the theories began. The disappearance of JACOBO GRINBERG in December 1994 remains one of the greatest intellectual and spiritual enigmas of Latin America. He He left no note. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't flee. He simply vanished, as if he had crossed an invisible threshold, one he himself had described in his research. His house, when searched, had all his belongings in place. His clothes, his computer, his notebooks. Nothing seemed forced. Everything was intact, except him. For some, he escaped. For others, he was silenced. But for those who have studied his legacy deeply, there's a third hypothesis. Grinberg transcended the perceptual field. He dematerialized in a sense. He integrated into the field of consciousness he himself defined as the syntropic matrix of reality. This is not mere fantasy. Jacobo often spoke of the possibility of changing states of existence through advanced meditation, conscious fusion with the quantum field, and ego disidentification. He mentioned documented cases of yogis disappearing during spiritual practices, shamans becoming invisible in rituals, and states of consciousness so elevated that matter seemed to dissolve. In his final years, he was deeply interested in what he called processes of self-delocalization. In other words, the ability to move consciousness out of the physical body without dying. Is this what happened to him? No one can say for sure. What is certain is that he left clues. In his most recent writings, particularly in texts like The Shamans of Mexico, The Creation of the Universe, and The Conscious Brain, a bolder shift in his discourse can be seen. He moved from talking about the structure of perception to exploring the hidden doors of reality. In fact, he made it clear that certain ritual practices could modify brain frequency to such an extent that consciousness detaches from linear time. This would explain why many women who practice secret prayer between 3 and 5 in the morning report experiences where time seems to stop, the body feels lighter, and a non-physical presence surrounds them. For Grinberg, rituals were not simply cultural practices. They were technologies of consciousness. Every element, a candle, a word, a symbol, a specific hour, was a coordinate to contact the syntropic field. From this perspective, prayer is not a plea, but a vibrational key. When spoken with intention, in an expanded state, it activates resonance patterns that align the individual with deeper layers of reality. It's as if the universe had hidden locks, and these prayers were keys encoded in the language of energy. And this is where the connection with feminine consciousness becomes central. Jacobo argued that feminine perception, more connected to the symbolic, the intuitive, and the subtle, was more skilled at tuning into these keys, while the masculine approach, in energetic terms, not necessarily gender, tend to go outward to construct and analyze. The feminine approach tend to go inward to feel, to decode from emotion and the body. In his studies with female shamans, wise grandmothers, and traditional healers, Grinberg identified a natural ability to enter trance without force, to perceive information from the field without needing to rationalize it. Many of the women he worked with had the habit of waking between 3 and 5 in the morning. Some said it was the hour when spirits walked. Others, that it was the moment when the silence of the world allowed the voice of the soul to be heard. But they all agreed on one thing. At that hour, prayer had more power. It was as if the night itself opened, as if a veil lifted, allowing the word to cross dimensions and rise to touch a pure reality. Jacobo then began to study what happened to brain at those hours. He discovered that between 3 and 5 in the morning, the human body is in a particular phase of the circadian cycle. Melatonin levels are higher, heart rate slower, and the brain operates in theta frequencies associated with deep meditation, creativity, lucid dreams, and access to unconscious memories. That is, the body is in a natural state of expansion. In that context, a prayer is not just mentally heard. It imprints on the field. It becomes a creative act. This point was crucial for Grinberg. He believed that the word, when born from a state of coherent consciousness, had a shaping effect on the structure of the quantum field. That's why he insisted it wasn't enough to say the words. One had to feel them, embody them, vibrate them. Only then could a true interaction with the field occur. This aligns with what many women experience when practicing secret prayer at dawn. It's not about a prayer repeated mechanically, but a vibrational act where body, emotion, and thought align. Some testimonies collected in the years following Grinberg's disappearance report women who, by practicing this prayer consistently, achieve physical healing, precise intuitions, clear decisions, and profound life transformations. One of them, for example, said she carried an inexplicable sadness for years. No therapy seemed to work, until she began to wake up without an alarm exactly at 3 in the morning. At first, she thought it was insomnia, but then an inner voice urged her pray, not a traditional prayer, but a short phrase that came to her in dreams. She began repeating it each dawn, sitting in silence with a candle lit. And in less than a month, something changed. She began to cry without knowing why, then feel a peace she had never known, and finally to have dreams where she met her deceased grandmother, who revealed forgotten childhood memories. These kinds of stories cannot be explained by behavior psychology or classical neurology, but through synergy, they can. Grinberg claimed that the field of consciousness has no physical or temporal limits. The information of your ancestors, your unexpressed emotions, your unconscious memories, everything is present, encoded, vibrating in the field. And when you align with that vibration, reality begins to show another face, a more symbolic, more coherent, more meaningful one. This doesn't mean every prayer must happen at that time, but it does mean that between 3 and 5 in the morning, the veil between dimensions becomes thinner. The critical mind falls silent. The world's noise stops, and the essential becomes audible. That's why Grinberg didn't speak of praying from fear or need, but from connection and recognition, remembering, as he said, that you are not a passive observer of reality. You are a co-creator, and what you think, what you feel, what you speak, shapes the universe you live in. Maybe that's why he disappeared, because he understood reality could unfold, because he discovered a shortcut, or maybe because his mission was fulfilled, and the next step could only be taken from another plane. What's certain is that he left a legacy that continues to grow, a legacy that inspires thousands to awaken to their own inner power, and above all, to women who each night, unseen, light a candle, close their eyes and say the prayer, the one not written in any book, but that lives in ancestral memory, the one that, when said at the exact moment, does not ask, but activates. At some point in history, ancient peoples began to speak of a sacred hour, a moment in the night when the veil between worlds grows thinner, when visible reality weakens, and the invisible reveals itself more clearly. They call it the hour of the spirits, the hour of the soul, the hour of mercy, the moment of the third eye, the silence of God, or the awakening of the heart. Though its names vary across cultures, the time is strikingly consistent, between 3 and 5 in the morning. Why? What exactly happens in that night fragment that so many spiritual, mystical, and philosophical traditions have highlighted? JACOBO GRINBERG didn't ignore this coincidence. Quite the opposite. He explored it deeply. He understood that during this time not only did biological rhythms shift, but dimensions of perception activated that were rarely accessible by day. From neurophysiology, it's already known that the human body enters a special stage during these hours. Vital functions slow, melatonin levels peak, and the brain operates mainly in theta and delta frequencies. These waves are linked to deep meditation, REM sleep, hypnagogic states, and spontaneous access to the unconscious. But it is not only the body that changes. The environment also changes. Various studies in chronobiology and magnetometry have revealed that during the early hours of dawn, Earth's electromagnetic activity slightly decreases, as if the entire planet were breathing more slowly. This reduces environmental energy noise and allows human consciousness, especially feminine consciousness, to tune into subtler planes of information. It is in that field, according to Grinberg, where the secret prayer gains its power, because it is not only recited, it is written into the field. Shamanic knowledge has always known this. In ancestral cultures of Mexico, spirit watchers, women and men chosen as guardians, held sacred vigils between midnight and dawn, not by chance. Rituals of connection with ancestors, chants for dimensional opening, or the deepest spiritual cleansings began right after 3 a.m. The wise ones of Tibet knew it too. Monks started their spiritual journey within that same window, when the body has not yet adapted to wakefulness, but the soul is already awake. In Christianity, the hour of 3 a.m. has long been associated with spiritual struggle, as if good and evil face each other in a silent field where pure souls could pray more effectively. It's no coincidence that the most intuitive, sensitive, or spiritually active people report waking up naturally during these hours, without alarm, for no apparent reason, as if an invisible force gently lifted them. At first they might think it's insomnia, but if they pause to feel, to observe attentively, they will notice a dense calm in the air, a kind of suspension of time that invites listening to something beyond thought. It is in that silence where many women have begun to practice secret prayer, not as an obligation nor as a religious routine, but as an inner response, as an echo of ancestral wisdom rising from deep within. What is interesting is that these practices are not learned through direct instruction. Most women who begin praying at that hour do not do so because someone taught them, but because something inside them remembers. And that is a phenomenon Grinberg studied deeply: the existence of unlearned knowledge, which he called nonlinear memory. This memory does not reside in the conventional brain, but in the synergetic field that surrounds and penetrates every living being. According to his theory, this field holds the energetic history of the individual, their emotional lineage, their transgenerational experiences, and their links to higher levels of consciousness. That is why, when a woman wakes up at 3:33 in the morning and feels the urge to pray, she is not obeying a cultural habit. She is responding to an energetic activation. Something in her field is aligned with a specific frequency, and from that place emerges a need to articulate a sound, a word, an intention. In many cases, that word is not learned but revealed. It comes in the form of an image, a sensation, a memory, or an intuition. And when it is spoken, it has an immediate impact on her emotional state. Some women report crying without reason, feeling chills, brief visions, or even the loving presence of someone no longer in this realm. There is no single way to experience it. Each experience is different, but there are common elements: the deep stillness of the environment, the feeling of being accompanied by something greater, the certainty of being in the right moment, and the relief felt at the end of the prayer. This last point is crucial. Many of them affirm that after praying, their anxiety lessens, their thoughts align, their body relaxes. Even those who had never meditated or prayed before discovering this practice an inexplicable balm, a medicine with no name. From a scientific perspective, this could be partially explained through neuroplasticity and the biochemistry of the limbic system. When a person enters a state of gratitude, devotion, or deep love, as usually happens when praying from the soul, the brain secretes endorphins, oxytocin, and serotonin. These substances produce well-being, reduce pain perception, and strengthen the immune system. That is, praying at that hour has not only a spiritual effect, but also a neurological and physiological one. However, for Grinberg, the key was not only the body or the chemistry, it was a field. Every physical, emotional, or mental effect was a consequence of an alignment with the synergetic field, and that field responds to vibratory codes. That is why he insisted that the word is a generator of reality. When spoken with intention, focus, and emotion, it acts like a wave that alters the very structure of the universe around us. In quantum terms, we could say that prayer collapses the field of possibilities, choosing one specific reality among many. That would also explain why there are times when this practice becomes more potent. The field is not static. It breathes, pulses, moves with the rhythms of the cosmos. There are moments when it is more open, more receptive. And between 3 and 5 in the morning, in almost all cultures studied by Grinberg, the consensus is the same. It is the moment when collective consciousness sleeps and the individual consciousness becomes more powerful. This does not mean that anything said at that hour will have an immediate effect. It is not about repeating empty phrases. Grinberg spoke of internal alignment. For the prayer to have real power, it must be accompanied by presence, by coherence between what is said, what is felt, and what is believed. That coherence generates what he calls syntropic resonance, a form of connection between the subject and the field, where both enter into synchrony and transformation occurs. And that transformation is not always immediately visible. Sometimes, today's prayer manifests as clarity within a week. Sometimes, as a lucid dream that brings an answer. Other times, as a spontaneous healing, an unexpected call, a firm decision that could not be made before. But something changes. Always. Because once that portal 3 is crossed, one no longer returns the same to the world. It looks different. It feels different. And one begins to understand that reality is not fixed, but malleable. In many ancient cultures, women were considered guardians of invisible time. Not the time of the clock, but the time of the soul. They knew when to plant, when to give birth, when to heal, and also when to speak with what is not seen. The grandmothers of different traditions knew that between 3 and 5 in the morning a portal opened, a threshold, a passage between the consciousness of the world and the consciousness of the spirit. JACOBO GRINBERG, when researching shamanic rituals in Mexico, found that this time slot frequently appeared in practices of connection with higher planes. But the most interesting thing was how, by combining that ancestral knowledge with scientific tools, a coherent explanation of the phenomenon began to emerge. Grinberg did not limit himself to listening to stories. He measured brain waves, analyzed physiological responses, observed patterns of electrical activity, and examined the behavior of the nervous system during rituals that occurred at dawn. One of his most surprising findings was the synchronization between deep meditative states and the activation of brain areas linked to extrasensory perception. These areas, especially the parietal lobe and the temporal-occipital region, were strongly activated during silent concentration practices. When this occurred between 3 and 5 a.m., the effect was even more marked, as if the brain at that moment were more willing to break its own limits. This type of brain activity, difficult to reach in normal waking states, is closely related to theta waves, which are in a range of 4 to 7 hertz. Theta waves are not common during the day, except in states of deep meditation, hypnosis, or moments before sleep. But at dawn, when the body has not yet fully emerged from REM sleep, these waves are at their peak, which means that the natural state of the brain at those hours is already receptive by itself. And if at that moment a clear intention is introduced, a prayer spoken from the heart, or a mantra charged with meaning, the impact can be disproportionately deep. This could also explain why many people report lucid dreams, out-of-body experiences, visions, or inexplicable sensations just during these hours. It is not necessarily about paranormal phenomena in the strict sense. It is rather an expansion of perceptual range. Grinberg spoke of consciousness being modulated like an antenna, and at certain times of the day or night, that antenna could capture more channels, more information, more simultaneous realities. The shamans he worked with knew this without talking about brain waves or neuroplasticity, but they knew it. That is why many rituals of deep healing, of contact with the spirit of the forest, with power animals, or with ancestors, were carried out when the world slept. Because, according to them, it is in the silence of the world that the universe can be heard. It is in absolute darkness where the inner light becomes clearer. And it is in the solitude of the dawn when the soul remembers what it came to do here. Many contemporary women, without direct contact with these ancestral knowings, have begun to experience something similar. Some say they wake up at the same time every night without reason, that it's not anxiety or stress. It's something else, an inner calling they can't explain. At first they resist, try to go back to sleep, but over time they learn to obey the soul. They get up, light a candle, drink water, sit in silence, and repeat a phrase that doesn't come from outside but from within. That phrase becomes prayer. A prayer without formula, without dogma, but with such intense emotional charge that it transforms their energy. In interviews gathered by therapists and scholars who have revisited Grinberg's work, many of these women describe the same sequence: a spontaneous awakening, a sense of urgency, the need to pray, a moment of deep calm, and then a shift. Sometimes the change is immediate, a clear idea, an answer to a question, physical relief. Other times it's gradual, an improvement in health, sustained peace, emotional openness. And in several cases, the testimonies agree on a common experience: the sensation of being accompanied, of not being alone, as if an invisible but benevolent presence were there with them. This experience is not only significant on a personal level, but also on a collective level, because when many people in different parts of the world connect at the same time with a similar intention, it generates what Grinberg called a shared synergetic field, a vibrational space where consciousness intertwines. And that intertwining can literally alter physical events. This is also what quantum science refers to when it speaks of non-locality. Two particles can be millions of kilometers apart, but when entangled, What happens to one affects the other. Grinberg believed the same could happen with human consciousness. That's why, when a woman prays at 3:33 a.m., she's not alone. She is joining a network of consciousness that transcends time and space. Even today, with the most advanced technology, we cannot accurately measure this type of field, but its effect is visible. It is measurable in the transformation of those who participate in it. It is measurable in the peace they experience, in the clarity they feel, in the strength they recover. Because by activating that sacred moment, they're not just accessing a deeper reality, they are remembering their power. To remember, that is a key word. For Grinberg, every act of spiritual connection is an act of remembrance, not of invention, not of fantasy, but of returning to something already known but forgotten. And the early hours are the best time to remember, because it is when the world's noise disappears, when the day's duties do not distract us, when the soul can finally speak without being interrupted. Some women have taken this practice to a more ritualized level. They prepare a special space, use symbols, light incense, dress in white, not because it's necessary, but because the ritual helps them enter a state of reverence. They know they are entering a sacred space, that the words they speak will not only resonate in their ears, but in the field around them. That moment is not just for asking, but also for thanking, for releasing, for planting. Because a prayer is not just a spiritual seed, it is a vibrational programming, a quantum act. Grinberg said that the universe is like a sensitive mirror. It reflects not what we say with our mouths, but what we vibrate with our hearts. That's why he insisted that the emotional state with which one prays is more important than the words themselves. A short phrase said with deep faith can move more energy than 100 mechanical prayers. And if that phrase is said between 3 and 5 a.m., the effect is multiplied, not by magic, but by energetic science. In short, what happens in that span is not fantasy. It's an opportunity. It's a threshold. It's a moment when ordinary reality softens and allows access to alternative realities. And those who understand it, those who practice it, begin to live differently, more connected, more clear, more conscious, because they no longer feel alone in the night. They know they are accompanied, and that every early morning, when everything is silent, the universe listens. Now then, their words are not read, they are remembered, that do not come from a text, but from a deep echo in the heart. And that is what happens with the so-called secret prayer. It is not taught as a formula. It has no fixed structure or a single language. It is secret not because it is forbidden, but because it can only be revealed to those prepared to feel it. Many women have spoken it without knowing it was the one. It was born to them in a whisper, came to them in a dream, emerged through tears at 3:33 in the morning, as if their soul knew what to say before their mind understood it. And it is precisely this intuitive, symbolic, and vibrational character that makes the secret prayer a spiritual phenomenon deeply connected with JACOBO Grinberg's legacy. Grinberg understood that language, beyond its communicative value, holds a creative power. It's no coincidence that many cosmogonies claim the universe began with a word. In the beginning was the word. The scriptures say, for Grinberg, that word was a primordial vibration that organized the synergetic field. And when a person accesses a field through an expanded state of consciousness, via meditation, trance, prayer, or deep silence, they can use language again for its original purpose, to create reality. The secret prayer is not a request, though it sometimes seems like a plea, nor is it a positive affirmation in the self-help style. It is more like a vibrational key, a code that tunes into a specific frequency of the field. And that frequency is found precisely between 3 and 5 in the morning, when the field becomes more accessible, more permeable, more available to reconfigure the structure of reality. That's why it doesn't matter if the prayer is long or short, if it's in Spanish, in Nahuatl, in Hebrew, in Quechua, or even in a language not known rationally. What matters is that the prayer arises from the emotional center of the being, that it holds inner truth, that it's not repetition, but the authentic expression of a movement of the soul. Many women have described how this prayer arrived spontaneously. Some claim that one night, upon waking up, they felt a very clear impulse to speak, not with someone, but with something, an energy, a presence, a source. Others don't speak, but murmur, or sing softly, or simply repeat a phrase they can't trace in memory, but feel as their own. Some say, "I surrender to you." Others repeat, "I'm part of the whole, and the whole sustains me." Some only say someone's name or an ancestral word like Ima, Luma, Sankara, Ilan, and they do so with such strong emotion that they cry, laugh, or tremble afterward, not from fear, but from the intensity of the energy that moves. JACOBO GRINBERG, in his final writings, spoke of a phenomenon called spontaneous field activation. He described it as a sudden connection between individual consciousness and the synergetic field, occurring when certain factors align. A deep emotional state, a silent environment, mental openness, and above all, authentic intention. This activation, he said, occurred more easily in people with less rigid neural structures, that is, more sensitive, intuitive, and emotionally connected. And it happened that many of those people were women, not by chance. Then, most testimonies about this prayer come from women who don't consider themselves religious, but spiritual, who don't follow a doctrine, but listen to their intuition, who don't seek an external God, but a connection with the sacred within. And when, in that intimate moment of dawn, they speak their prayer, they feel the universe respond, not with words, but with sensations, with calm, with certainty, with direction. But where does this prayer come from? Does it have a cultural, historical, mythical origin? Although there isn't a single foundational story, many traditions agree that ancient women, midwives, healers, grandmothers, recited sacred phrases in the silence of the night. Some did it to protect their families, others to ask guidance from their ancestors, some to heal someone sick, and many simply to remember their purpose on earth. These phrases were kept as family secrets, passed down from generation to generation, almost always from woman to woman, and rarely written down. In some towns of Oaxaca, for example, the custom still exists where elder women wake before dawn to speak with the shadow. That's what they call that inner dialogue where the woman connects with her deepest emotions. It's not about confessing, but revealing oneself, saying what wasn't said in the day, crying what wasn't cried, loving what couldn't be shown, and that revelation becomes in itself a prayer. Other cultures have similar rituals. In Tibet, the women who guard the songs of dawn chant repetitive phrases that seem simple, but hold powerful energetic formulas. In some Amazonian indigenous communities, mothers pray to their unborn children during the early morning, asking the forest spirits to bless them. And in many homes across the Arab world, grandmothers wake in the darkness to recite verses from the Quran with a soft cadence, almost like a lullaby, not to ask for miracles, but to keep the connection with the divine source alive. All of this aligns with what Grinberg proposed, that prayer is an interface between consciousness and the quantum field, a bridge, a vibrational membrane. And when that prayer is said with coherence, meaning what's thought, felt, and said are in tune, the field responds. It reorganizes. It modifies the structure of perception. It shifts the energy. And eventually, it changes physical reality. That is why many women who have made this practice a nightly habit report concrete transformations. Some have left toxic relationships after a decisive prayer. Others have gained clarity about a career change. Some have improved their health without traditional medical treatments. Others have felt a reconnection with their mothers, daughters, sisters after years of emotional distance. It is not about miracles in the religious sense. It is about deep alignment with an inner truth that was already there, waiting to be heard. JACOBO GRINBERG spoke of these types of experiences as resonances activated by the language of the soul. For him, the soul had its own language, one that did not always use human words, but found in prayer a legitimate channel to manifest. That is the true secret prayer, not the one someone else teaches you, but the one born in your soul when everything else has fallen silent, the one only you can utter, the one no one can write for you. And that is the most sacred part of this practice. It needs no dogmas, hierarchies, or intermediaries. It does not demand a sophisticated altar or prior training. It only asks for emotional honesty, courage to look inward, silence to hear what emerges, and willingness to let a phrase arise, even if it makes no logical sense, even if it's not perfect, even if it sounds strange, because you are not speaking with your mind. You are speaking with your origin. That is the secret prayer, a whisper from the soul to the universe, a word vibrating at the exact moment when the world sleeps and you awaken. If something inside you has resonated up to this point, if you have ever woken between 3 and 5 a.m. feeling that something calls you, tell us below with the phrase, "I have also awakened." Your testimony may be the sign another person needs to remember their path. Practicing the secret prayer does not require belonging to a specific religion or adopting complex ritual postures. There are no strict formulas, no written guides, no correct manual that guarantees connection. Yet those who practice it agree there is something deeply sacred about how it occurs. It happens in intimacy, in the soft darkness of early morning, amid absolute silence where the soul seems to regain its voice. Prayer is not repeated out of obligation. It is said because it arises as if the body needed it as much as oxygen. Although each person can live it uniquely, certain patterns repeat and help better understand how this prayer is practiced. First, there is almost always a sudden awakening between 3 and 5 a.m., not from external noise, but from an inner impulse. Those who have experienced it explain it is as if something gently shook them inside, as if a soft force told them, "Wake up now." There is no anxiety, no fear, only a strange certainty that it is time to get up. Most do not turn on lights. They prefer to let the twilight envelop them. Some light a small candle. Others sit on the bed or kneel beside it. The body settles naturally, as if it knows what is coming. It is not a rehearsed prayer. No one takes a book. No one follows a structure. What arises is spontaneous, raw, authentic. Some begin simply by breathing deeply. Others place a hand on the chest or over the belly. Some vocalize sounds. Others whisper words. In many cases, the first thing to emerge is crying. Deep crying, which does not always have a clear cause, but that releases, relieves, cleanses. And then, amid that emotional opening, the phrase arises. Sometimes it is a single word. Other times, a series of brief, almost poetic phrases. Some women repeat mantras they did not know they knew. Others feel they channel an unknown language. They do not understand what they say, but feel it is right. Grinberg would say that at that moment a resonance with the synergetic field has occurred, that the individual consciousness has managed to tune into a deep frequency reality, and from there, the prayer becomes creative. One of the most fascinating aspects of this practice is that it needs no defined addressee. Some prayers are directed to God, others to the universe, to Mother Earth, to the ancestors, to a nameless energy, but many simply arise without an addressee, as an act of pure expression, and that is part of its power. It does not necessarily ask for something. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it pleads. Sometimes it thanks. But in most cases, the prayer is a formless dialogue, closer to poetry than supplication, closer to art than structured petition. Many testimonies agree this practice has very concrete effects in daily life. Some women say that after weeks of praying at the same time, they have experienced changes in their emotional state. Less anxiety, more stability, more clarity to make decisions. Others report more vivid dreams, feelings of spiritual guidance, or even the appearance of answers in their surroundings. Signs, synchronicities, unexpected messages. Some begin prayer with an internal question and, the next day, find a clear answer in a casual conversation, a phrase in a book, or even in a song. There are also reports about physical improvements, chronic pains that lessen, insomnia that disappears, more balanced hormonal changes. Although this may seem anecdotal from a medical view, Grinberg proposed that the structure of the synergetic field directly influences physiology. That is, when a person changes their deep perception, when they align their energy, their body reacts. It's not magic, it's coherence. The body follows consciousness. And if that consciousness is ordered, the body does too. Another constant is the strengthening of intuition. Many practitioners claim that after weeks repeating the prayer, they began to have a kind of sharper sixth sense. They intuited what others felt. They knew which decisions to take without hesitation. They sensed events before they happened. This matches what Grinberg described as expansion of perceptual threshold, a state where the brain stops filtering so much information and allows more signals from the field to become conscious. Beyond personal effects, there's also a symbolic dimension surrounding the secret prayer. The moment it's said, the space where it's spoken, the gestures that accompany it, all of that is charged with meaning. The time between 3 and 5 a.m. represents, in many traditions, the end of the dark night of the soul and the start of the light. In spiritual astrology, that is the moment of transit between worlds, when the constellations align to favor introspection, connection with guides, and inner rebirth. The candle's fire, so present in many of these practices, symbolizes awakened consciousness. Lighting it amid the darkness isn't just an aesthetic gesture. It's a symbolic act of saying, I am here, I am awake, I am present. The absolute silence of the environment becomes a mirror of the mind, and the words that emerge are imprinted on that silence like brushstrokes on a blank canvas. That's why many women feel the prayer not only transforms their present, but also their past and lineage. Grinberg spoke of time not as a line, but as a network. From that perspective, a prayer said today can heal wounds coming from previous generations. In fact, several women recount that when praying, they feel the presence of their grandmothers, great-grandmothers, women they never met but who appear in mental images, in smells, in sensations. Sometimes that prayer seems not only their own but collective, as if an ancient voice spoke through them, as if they were channels of something greater that embraces and returns strength to them. The opposite also happens. Many discover that when praying they are not only healing their own story, but planting clarity for the women who will come later. Daughters, nieces, granddaughters not yet born, but already receiving vibrational echo of a purified energy. Thus, the secret prayer becomes a transgenerational act. It's not just for the one who says it. It's for a whole chain of souls connected by something deeper than blood, shared consciousness. This explains why, even though the prayer isn't taught directly, many women from the same family start practicing it without knowing the others do. It's as if there were an ancestral call that reactivates, as if the soul remembered the exact moment it must speak. And that happens almost always in the deepest silence of the night. You don't have to be an expert to do it, nor must you have read Grinberg, studied metaphysics, or master meditation techniques. You only need presence, a willing body, an honest heart, and the courage to say what was never said before. That's all. The secret prayer doesn't demand perfection, only authenticity. It doesn't seek to enlighten anyone, only to reveal what was already lit inside. And in that act, in that whisper-scented universe, the most powerful thing happens. Silent transformation, without grand rituals, without witnesses, without expectations. Just you, at dawn, saying what your soul remembers. That's enough to move invisible mountains. To heal without anyone noticing. To change your life from the root. Theory can inspire. Symbolism can move. But nothing has the transforming power of a real testimony. Because when a person tells what they have lived from the deepest place, what they share isn't just a story. It's a frequency, a door for others to cross to. And that is exactly what happens when we hear stories of women, and some men too, who have experienced radical transformations from practicing the secret prayer between 3 and 5 in the morning. These are not magical stories in the traditional sense. There are no wands, no movie miracles, but there are everyday miracles. Real, tangible, stories where the impossible became possible. Not because something external descended, but because something internal awakened. One of the most moving stories is Elena's, a 48-year-old therapist who had been living in deep depression for 3 years after the unexpected death of her eldest daughter. She had tried psychological treatments, psychiatric care, guided meditation, and spiritual support. Nothing could calm the emptiness she carried inside. One early morning, without apparent reason, she woke up at 3:15 a.m. She felt an urgency to get up, but didn't know why. She went to the living room, lit a candle, and sat in silence. She didn't know what to do. She closed her eyes and simply started to talk to her daughter. At first it was just a whisper, then a cry, then a phrase, "I am alive because you lived in me." She repeated that phrase over and over, as if someone else were dictating it from inside. She repeated it for a week, then a month, at 3:15. Always, and after 2 months, something changed. The sadness was still there, but it no longer drowned her. She no longer woke with guilt, but with gratitude. And for the first time, she could laugh again. Elena says the prayer didn't save her from death. It brought her back to life. Another powerful story is Mariella's, a 35-year-old woman who carried a deep fear of abandonment for over a decade. Her relationships were chaotic, repetitive, full of anxiety. One night, she began having recurring dreams about her biological mother, whom she never met. In one of those dreams, her mother hugged her and said, "I have looked for you in every woman you have loved." Mariella woke up crying, her heart pounding. On impulse, she sat up in bed and whispered, "I will no longer look for you outside. I recognize you in me." From that early morning, she began repeating that same phrase daily at 3:33 a.m. little by little. She felt her anxiety lessen. She could breathe. She could be alone without feeling abandoned. And for the first time, a relationship entered her life without drama, attachment, or fear. She says it was not the partner who healed her. It was a prayer that every night helped her find herself. There are also testimonies from older women, like Carmen, 72, who had lost the ability to sleep well for over 20 years. She could never reach deep rest. She woke constantly with intrusive thoughts. One day, she heard her granddaughter talk about the secret prayer and asked her to explain it. She received no instructions, just a suggestion to sit in darkness and speak honestly. The first night, Carmen only complained. She spoke with anger, with resentment, but when she finished, something in her body relaxed. She kept doing it, and with the days, the words changed. Anger turned into sadness. Sadness turned into memory. Memory turned into peace. Today, Carmen sleeps deeply. But the most valuable thing is not that. She says she has recovered her inner voice, the one she had silenced for decades. The prayer was her way to listen to herself again. It's not just women. There are also men who, quietly, have begun practicing this connection. One of them is Santiago, a doctor who during the pandemic lost several patients and entered a deep existential crisis. Nothing he had learned in medical school could calm the emotional burden he carried. One night, he started waking up at the same time, for 04 a.m. At first, he thought it was stress, but then he noticed that every time he got up, a phrase mentally crossed him. "You are not alone." He began writing those phrases, then saying them aloud, and over months, he developed a silent practice of prayer and writing that helped him not only to hold himself emotionally, but to completely change his approach to medicine. Today, he integrates mindful attention, active listening, and emotional support with his patients. He says it all began when he dared to listen in the moment, when everything was silent. For JACOBO GRINBERG, these were not mystical phenomena in the superstitious sense. They were manifestations of the synergetic field, reactions of the internal universe to a state of coherence, openness, and deep contact with the source of information. His theory stated that the field does not respond to what we say from the superficial mind, but to what we vibrate from the core of consciousness. And when that core aligns with a pure intention, the field reorganizes the reality around us. That is why it is no coincidence that so many people experience transformations by repeating phrases that arise from the soul. Those phrases are living organisms, vibrations that integrate into the fabric of reality. And when repeated with presence, they create new structures. It is as if each prayer were a quantum seed planted in the field, a seed that germinates in the form of clarity, healing, reconciliation, or direction. What's striking is that many of these experiences happen without contact among those who live them. Women in different parts of the world, unknown to each other, unaware of one another, begin to awaken at the same hour, to speak similar words, to undergo similar changes. This points to a greater intelligence operating through these practices, as if the field itself were calling those ready to respond. And the secret prayer is a shared language between individual consciousness and universal consciousness. In many of these accounts, people don't just transform their emotions or relationships. They also change their bodies, health, choices, and life purpose. Some women have left toxic jobs after a specific prayer. Others have restored bonds with children they hadn't spoken to for years. Some have discovered talents they never explored. It's as if, by accessing that sacred early morning space, they discover a more authentic version of themselves. One not conditioned by fear, guilt, duty, or the past. And that may be the most transformative of all, that the secret prayer is an external act. It is a mirror, one that, when activated at the right moment, reveals what has always been there. The power to create, heal, remember, and reconnect with the essential. There are stories that don't fit into words, yet still need to be told, not to impress nor approve, but to share a seed of possibility. In the practice of secret prayer, that seed is spread worldwide in the hearts of people who, without intending, have awakened in the middle of the night with an inexplicable certainty that there is something more, that they are not alone, that their soul has something to say, and the universe is willing to listen. One such story is Valeria's, a 41-year-old woman, mother of two, with an apparently stable life. She had a good job, a supportive partner, and physical health. But inside, she felt emptiness, a shapeless sadness. Nothing specific was missing, yet something essential wasn't there. One night, she began waking at 3:47 in the morning. At first, she attributed it to stress or body rhythms. But after several consecutive nights, she started paying attention. There was a different silence, denser, more alive. She got up and sat on the floor. Without thinking, she said aloud, "Show me who I am." That phrase became her prayer. She repeated it each dawn for 3 months. During that time, she began having lucid dreams, childhood memories she thought forgotten, images of herself in moments of great power and vulnerability. Gradually, she began making different choices. She quit her job, moved to the countryside with her family, and started teaching workshops on emotional awareness. She says it wasn't a drastic change, but a return, that the prayer didn't transform her into another woman. It brought her back to who she always was. There's also Irene's case, an older woman who suffered severe joint pain for over 20 years. She had tried conventional medical treatments, alternative therapies, and natural remedies. Nothing gave lasting relief. A friend told her about the secret prayer. She didn't understand much, but decided to try. She had nothing to lose. For 40 consecutive days, she woke at 4:10 in the morning, lit a candle, and said a single phrase, "I am light inside the body." At first, she felt nothing. But in the 3rd week, she noticed less stiffness. She started sleeping better. The pain diminished. Later, she found that saying the prayer made her breathing deeper and her thoughts softer. She improved not only physically. She became happier, more patient, more compassionate. Today, at 68, she says the prayer gave her what no medicine could: a reason to live peacefully with herself. One of the most enigmatic testimonies comes from Alicia, a woman who since youth had experiences she couldn't explain. Premonitory dreams, bodily sensations matching others' emotions, spontaneous connections with memories not her own. For years she thought it was imagination, until she discovered JACOBO GRINBERG's work. Everything made sense. She began practicing prayer at 3 a.m., guided only by intuition. One dawn, after finishing her prayer, she felt the room's air change. Everything grew denser, more subtle. She saw a luminous figure before her. It had no defined face, but radiated infinite peace. It didn't speak or touch her. It just was there. Then it vanished. Since then, that image became an anchor for her. She says she doesn't need to understand what it was. She only knows she's not alone, that something accompanies her. And whenever she prays, that presence returns, even if only as a feeling. These experiences may seem extraordinary, but if we observe them through Grinberg's perspective, they are natural, because in his view, consciousness is not limited to the body nor to time. It is a network, a fabric of information that manifests according to the openness of its inhabitant. Therefore, the more coherent a person's internal state is, the clearer their perception, and the clearer the perception, the easier it is to access levels of the field that previously seemed hidden or unreal. This connects with a phenomenon Grinberg studied deeply, extracerebral perception. In his experiments, People trained in meditation or focus techniques managed to describe stimuli they did not perceive with physical senses. They described colors, images, or sounds coming from other rooms, even when they had their eyes closed and no sensory contact. For him, this was evidence that the brain does not generate consciousness, but modulates it like a receiver. And when the receiver is tuned, it is possible to capture more of the spectrum of the real. Many of the people who practice the secret prayer relate exactly that, a tuning, not a sudden enlightenment, but greater sensitivity. They see more details. They catch others' emotions without words. They have gut feelings that turn out accurate, not because they develop special powers, but because they clear the perception channel. And this happens when the body is calm, the mind silent, and the heart open. These three conditions occur more naturally between 3 and 5 in the morning. That is why this moment is a door, and the prayer, the key. There are also testimonies from women who have lived more mysterious healings. Pains that disappear after an intense prayer. Broken family bonds restored without external intervention. Children returning after years of silence. Couples reconciling from a new level of awareness. These experiences cannot be proven in a lab, but they repeat so frequently in such different people that dismissing them would be naive. Grinberg understood this. That is why he insisted that the subjective is not inferior to the real. It is another form of reality. Many health professionals, after learning about these experiences, have started integrating the spiritual dimension into their practices. Doctors, psychologists, therapists who, without abandoning science, recognize that prayer, meditation, and interconnection directly influence integral health. It is not about replacing treatments, but understanding that humans are not just bodies. They are energy, they are emotion, they are vibrational fields. And ignoring this means any cure will be partial. A psychologist from Buenos Aires, who worked for years with women in trauma situations, reported that after introducing the nocturnal prayer practice as a voluntary therapeutic resource, she noticed significant improvements in her patients' emotional self-regulation. She did not impose the practice. She only suggested it, and the women who adopted it began experiencing restorative dreams, fewer nightmares, better stress management, and a stronger sense of inner guidance. Some even started creative processes they had felt blocked before: writing, painting, singing. Prayer not only healed wounds, it awakened gifts. And perhaps that is the most revealing, that this practice, silent and personal, has a capacity to activate what was sleeping. It not only soothes, it also reveals. It brings to light parts of the self that were off, repressed, or denied. That is why those who sustain it over time not only feel better, they feel more complete, more authentic, more connected with themselves and with the whole. At this point, many who have heard of the secret prayer wonder if they too can experience something like this. The answer is not technical. It is not about repeating steps or copying rituals. It is about listening. Because, as many women who have lived it say, prayer is not sought, it seeks you. And when the moment arrives, you just know you do not need to understand. You only need to be willing and trust, because everything begins with awakening, one that does not depend on an alarm, but on the soul. For centuries, science and spirituality walked parallel paths, sometimes wary of each other, other times ignoring one another completely. Science seeking to measure, explain, prove, spirituality seeking to experience, transcend, connect. But there are moments in history when both paths cross, when the mystery can no longer be denied, and science is forced to look beyond the visible. That crossing is precisely the terrain JACOBO GRINBERG inhabited with courage, rigor, and unusual openness. His work did not just try to build bridges between these two worlds. It succeeded. Grinberg was not a man content with theories. He was an empirical researcher. He observed, measured, recorded, but he also knew that not everything valuable can be measured with traditional instruments. And so, many times he found himself in an uncomfortable position for academia. Too rigorous to be called mystical, too bold to be considered purely scientific. Yet, his legacy is more relevant today than ever, especially as modern science begins to validate many principles he upheld decades ago. One of those key principles is the idea that consciousness modifies reality. This postulate although it sounds abstract, lies at the heart of many spiritual practices, including prayer, meditation, and directed intention. Grinberg proposed that what we experience as reality is not an exact reproduction of the external world, but neurosensorial organization of the quantum field surrounding us. In other words, what we call reality results from how our nervous system structures a vast matrix of energetic possibilities. And this structure can be modified by thought, emotion, and intention. This concept found resonance years later in quantum physics research. Experiments like the double slit, for example, show that the observer's presence alters particle behavior. When no one observes, particles act like waves. When someone observes, they collapse into particles. This means the simple act of observing changes the experiment's outcome. Consciousness is not passive. It intervenes, participates, creates. And although quantum physics and neurophysiology operate on different planes, what Grinberg tried to demonstrate is that the bridge between both is human consciousness. One of his most relevant works was his research on interpersonal neural fields. He conducted experiments where two people meditated together, connected to an electroencephalogram, without speaking or touching. What he observed was astonishing. After a few minutes, their brain waves began to synchronize, as if their brains were literally tuning into the same frequency. This occurred even when the people did not know each other beforehand. What it suggested is that there's a level of interconnection between human beings that transcends the five senses, a level where one's field affects the other's field, and where thought, emotion, and intention can be transmitted without words. This phenomenon has also been observed by other researchers. The HeartMath Institute, for example, has studied for years cardiac coherence and how the heart emits an electromagnetic field measurable several meters from the body. What they found is that when a person enters a state of gratitude, love, or compassion, their heart rate becomes coherent, and this field can positively influence other nearby people, even without direct interaction. This validates the idea that internal states cultivated in secret prayer not only have personal effects, but also interpersonal and collective ones. Moreover, neuroscience studies have begun to explore what happens in the brain during deep meditation, contemplative prayer, and mantra repetition. Using technologies like functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI, it has been observed that during these states a specific network known as a default mode network activates, associated with introspection, imagination, and self-awareness. But also, the limbic system activates, regulating emotions, and the amygdala activity decreases, which is responsible for fear responses. This suggests that practices like secret prayer, repeated consistently, can literally change the brain's structure and functioning. Grinberg went further. He said that the mind is not confined to the brain, that there are levels of mind operating in the field, and this field is shared among all human beings. In his synergy model, he proposed that the brain acts as a modulator of the synergetic field, but that this field is external to the body. Consciousness, then, would not be an internal production but a tuning into a broader matrix. And this idea, though rejected by most of the time, today finds echoes in the unified field theory of consciousness, developed by scientists exploring links between neuroscience, quantum physics, and Eastern philosophy. One of the points that has met the most resistance in academia is the idea that prayer can produce measurable effects on the body and environment. However, several studies have attempted to address this issue. An example is a study conducted at Harvard University, where groups practicing prayer or meditation were compared to control groups. Biological markers such as blood pressure, cortisol levels, and heart rate were measured. The results were clear. Those who prayed or meditated showed significant improvements in physiological health, even in complex clinical conditions like hypertension or autoimmune disorders. But even more provocative are the studies that have tried to measure the effect of distant prayer. One of the most well-known is the one conducted by Dr. Randolph Bird, in which cardiac patients in a hospital were randomly divided into two groups. One group was prayed for without their knowledge, and the other was not. The patients in the prayed-for group had fewer complications, required fewer antibiotics, and were discharged faster from the hospital. Although these studies have their critics, and certainly require great caution when interpreting them, they open a fascinating door. What if intention can influence beyond the body? From Grinberg's perspective, the answer is yes. not because prayer is some external magic, but because it activates an internal resonance that aligns with the field of possibilities. Prayer does not change the world directly. It changes the frequency of the one who prays. And by doing so, that person enters another reality, one where events, emotions, and responses reorganize and sync with that new vibration. It's like tuning a radio dial. The stations are already there, but you need to tune the receiver. This perspective also helps explain why secret prayer does not always produce immediate or visible effects. Sometimes the field takes time to reorganize. Sometimes the change is not external, but internal. Sometimes it happens in dreams, in new ideas, in unexpected peace, in a conversation that seems casual but arrives at the right moment. The impact of prayer, from the synergetic view, is not linear. It is quantum, and that requires a different sensitivity to perceive it. Another point Grinberg explored was the impact of words on the structure of the field. Inspired by Masaru Emoto's studies on water and crystals formed by words or intentions, Grinberg proposed that language has an energetic component, that certain sound combinations, when spoken with emotion, generate specific patterns in the field. This is not exclusive to any language. It does not matter if it is spoken in Spanish, Nahuatl, or a personal language only you understand. What matters is a coherence between word, emotion, and presence. This explains why many women who practice secret prayer report profound emotional changes even without rationally understanding what they are saying. What happens is that their prayers align with a vibratory pattern that reorders the internal field, and therefore modifies their perception of the world. It is also why prayer does not need to be verbal. Sometimes it is enough to think, to feel, to imagine. The field responds not only to sound, but to intention. And here science and mystery embrace. Because science can measure frequencies, brain waves, heart patterns. But mystery is what gives meaning to that data. It is not enough to know that the amygdala calms during prayer. What matters is that this calm allows a mother to forgive, a daughter to reconcile, a woman to find her purpose at dawn. Grinberg's work is not limited to a theoretical framework. It is an invitation, a provocation, a compass to territories that cannot be explored only with formulas. And what many women are doing today, by repeating a prayer born from the soul between 3 and 5 in the morning, is precisely following that compass without knowing it. They are updating the map he drew. They are showing that the body, consciousness, and the field are not separate entities, but parts of the same living system that responds to the vibration of love, truth, and presence. Science, by definition, seeks what is verifiable. It wants to isolate variables, reproduce phenomena, establish patterns. And thanks to that rigor, we have understood the mechanisms of the body, brain, and matter. But there's a frontier that still resists that dissection. Consciousness. What is it? Where does it begin? Where does it end? Is it a product of the brain? Or is the brain merely a bridge channeling a broader consciousness? These questions fueled all of JACOBO GRINBERG's work. And his answer was clear. Consciousness is not inside the brain. The brain is an instrument, not the origin. The true origin is in the field, in an invisible matrix that contains all the information of the universe. Grinberg called it the synergetic field, and explained that the human being, through their neural network, orders that information and creates their experience reality. This proposal, though revolutionary, today aligns with contemporary scientific currents exploring the convergence of neuroscience, quantum physics, and spirituality. One of these currents is the theory of panpsychism, which holds that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like mass or gravity. From this perspective, consciousness does not emerge in the brain like steam from water, but is everywhere. Cells, particles, electromagnetic fields, all have some degree of consciousness. This theory finds a direct echo in Grinberg's vision, which posited that matter and consciousness are two distinct manifestations of the same vibratory substance. Another model that aligns with his vision is the receptor brain theory, proposed by scientists such as Carl Pribram, who developed the concept that the brain functions like a hologram. According to this theory, information is not stored locally, but is accessed from a field, just as a radio station tunes into different frequencies. This explains phenomena such as extracerebral memory, near-death experiences, accurate intuition, and inexplicable synchronicities. For Grinberg, this access to the field becomes clearer when the mind is in a state of coherence, prayer, deep silence meditation. That is when the channel clears and consciousness captures information that does not come from the physical senses, but from a more subtle plane. But how does all this translate into concrete experiences? In practices like secret prayer, that access to the field is activated from pure emotion. What happens is not that God grants a wish like in an external magical act. What happens is that the person enters a state of resonance with the frequency of the field where that peace, that clarity, that healing already exists, and by tuning into it, the experience updates in their reality. This is how a prayer can heal a wound, clarify a decision, or reconcile broken ties. Not because the world changes from the outside, but because the internal structure that interprets it is transformed. This process is not exclusive to those who practice spiritual rituals. Science has begun to observe something similar in studies on neuroplasticity. Researchers like Joe Dispenza, although from a more popular than academic approach, have documented how the repetition of thoughts charged with intense emotion can modify the brain's synaptic structure, and even more, how those modifications impact the immune system, the hormonal system, and genetic expression. In other words, what we feel and think has a direct effect on what we are physically. This, translated into Grinberg's language, is the activation of the synergetic field through a sustained vibratory act. And this is where the circle closes. What the women practice every early morning when they say their prayer is not just a symbolic act. It is an action of deep reorganization. The phrase they repeat, "I am alive because you lived in me. Show me who I am light inside the body," is not just poetry. It is an instruction that is recorded in the field. And that field, like intelligent software, responds by generating a new emotional, mental, and even biological configuration. This approach also sheds light on another important phenomenon, transgenerational memory. Grinberg argued that unresolved emotions, unexpressed traumas, and repressed desires of our ancestors do not disappear. They remain in the field, and because they were not integrated, they manifest in later generations. This coincides with recent findings in epigenetics, where traumatic events have been observed to leave chemical marks on DNA that are transmitted to descendants. In other words, the suffering experienced by a grandmother can affect the emotional sensitivity of her granddaughter, even if they never met. Secret prayer, when born from a state of deep emotional honesty, can act as a ritual of ancestral release. It not only soothes the person who speaks it, but resolves a knot that was tied in previous generations. Many women report that while praying, they feel the presence of women from their lineage. Some see their faces in dreams. Others hear phrases like whispers. Others simply feel a certainty. This wound was not only mine, and by releasing it, they not only heal themselves, they heal an entire chain of women who never had a voice to do so. Grinberg spoke of this as the activation of extended consciousness, a consciousness that is not limited to the present, but encompasses the past and the future. And when it is activated, it can transform not only what was, but also what will be. That is why many people who sustain this practice begin to see changes in their children, in their partners, in their environment. Not because they try to change them, but because by changing themselves, the vibration of the space they inhabit changes. This also explains why the impact of secret prayer is not solely individual. Many women, without knowing each other, repeat the practice at the same hour, with similar intentions from different parts of the world. According to Grinberg, this synchronicity is not coincidence. It is what he called fields of collective coherence. When many consciousnesses align on a similar frequency, even if physically separated, they generate a resonance that expands like ripples in a lake, and those ripples affect others. Emotions are contagious. Ideas are transmitted. The field is modified. This phenomenon has even been documented in studies on mass meditation. One of the most well-known is the Maharishi Project, in which thousands of people meditated simultaneously in different cities, and temporary reductions in crime, violence, and accidents were observed. Although these studies are difficult to replicate precisely, they raise a powerful possibility that collective consciousness has a measurable effect on social reality. And if that is true, then every prayer, every awakening at 3:33 a.m., every phrase spoken from the soul contributes to transforming the world more than we imagine. This understanding leads us to a profound reflection. Mystery is not the opposite of science. Mystery is what we have not yet managed to measure, and not due to lack of existence, but due to lack of proper instruments. JACOBO GRINBERG sensed this. That is why he never abandoned his scientific training. But he did not idolize it either. He understood that the method is a tool, not a prison, and that there are human experiences that require not only external observation, but conscious immersion. That is precisely what many people discover when they practice the secret prayer, that the most valuable knowledge is not found in books, but in direct experience, that when the body is silent, when the mind surrenders, when the soul dares to speak, a clarity appears that cannot be learned, only remembered. And that clarity is what transforms. We can then say that science and mystery are not enemies. They are complementary. Science gives us maps. Mystery shows us the territories that are not yet drawn. Science helps us understand. Mystery invites us to trust. And at the center of both is human consciousness, with its ability to perceive, to create, to heal, to love. Grinberg left this world mysteriously. But maybe he did not leave. Maybe he just crossed to the other side of the field, the one he described himself, and from where he continues to inspire us. Because his work did not remain on paper. It remained alive in every person who dares to look inside, in every prayer spoken in the early morning, in every woman who wakes without knowing why and ends up discovering that the reason was always within her. And that is deep down the most powerful thing of all. To know that we do not need to wait for science to prove everything in order to live it. To know that it is okay not to fully understand in order to feel deeply. To know that prayer is not just a calming tool, but a vibrant reminder of who we truly are. Conscious beings, creative beings, beings capable of opening portals with just a word spoken from the soul. Throughout this journey, we have gone through different layers of the same truth, that there is a deep wisdom that does not come from outside, but from within. That in the silence of the early morning, when the world sleeps and the body has not yet fully surrendered to the day, something is activated, something awakens, something that has no name, but can be clearly felt. We have explored who JACOBO GRINBERG was, his scientific legacy, his integrative vision between brain and consciousness, between field and perception. We have heard the voices of women who, without knowing each other, without belonging to a common doctrine, begin to pray between 3 and 5 in the morning, following an ancestral impulse that needs no explanation. And most importantly, we have remembered that you too can access that sacred space. The secret prayer does not belong to any tradition. It has no copyright, no fixed liturgy, no hierarchy to regulate it. It is free. It is yours. And it is as ancient as the first breath of a mother praying for her child, as the first song of a grandmother offering her wisdom to the fire. It is not about believing in something external. It is about remembering something internal. Because this prayer, more than a practice, is a recognition, a way of returning home, of reconnecting with that part of you that was not contaminated by fear, haste, or disconnection. Many have asked if it is necessary to wake up at exactly 3:33 for it to work. The answer is no. But it is true that there is something in that time that facilitates the opening. Brain activity changes. The body is at a different frequency. The collective energy field becomes still. And the soul, if attentive, can speak without being interrupted. It is not a matter of superstition. It is a matter of sensitivity. And everyone finds their exact time. Not with a clock, but with an internal calling that cannot be ignored. The important thing is not the hour. It is the intention. It is the state. It is the honesty with which you show up before yourself. Some nights you will not say anything. You will just cry, or just breathe, or just remain in silence. And that is also prayer. Because what transforms is not the sound, but the vibration from which it is emitted. So, if one night you have no words, do not look for them. If one night you do not feel strong, just sit. Because even in your stillness, even in your emptiness, the field listens. That is one of the greatest truths left to us by Grinberg Synergy, that the universe does not respond to logic, but to coherence, that your inner field, your emotional state, your truth, is what arranges your external reality, and that although it may seem small, changes everything. Because it means you are not a victim of what surrounds you. You are an active participant, living co-creation, a spark that, when lit, illuminates not only your life, but also that of those around you. And here lies the great gift this journey leaves you as. The recognition of inner power, not the power of control or imposition, but the power of vibrating in tune with what you want to see in the world. The power of healing from the root. The power of releasing burdens that are not yours. The power of speaking with your lineage, with your memories, with your body, and doing it without fear, without shame, without hurry, because the sacred cannot be rushed. The sacred is inhabited, and that is exactly what thousands of people are doing, even if they don't know each other, even if they don't call each other by name, even if they don't belong to any organized group. They are waking up at dawn. They are feeling the call. They are lighting candles. They are speaking phrases that don't come from a book, but from the soul. And in that silent act, they are weaving an invisible web of collective healing. A web that, as Grinberg said, resonates in the field and reconfigures shared reality. Because when a woman prays, she doesn't only heal her present. She heals those who came before and strengthens those who will come after. When a man surrenders to silence, he doesn't weaken. He cleanses. He realigns. He becomes more capable of holding space from love. And when a community, even a small one, even a digital one, unites in a shared intention, that intention leaves a vibrational imprint on the world. We don't see it, but we feel it, because everything done from the soul remains. That's why this video is not just information. It is an invitation. Not to ignore that inner voice calling you at dawn. Not to silence what you feel when everything outside is still. To allow yourself to remember who you are when you don't have to pretend. To open that sacred space, even if only for 5 minutes, and talk to yourself, to your deepest self, to what you call God, life source, light, or simply truth. You don't need expensive tools or prior studies or anyone's approval. You only need to be present, to breathe, and to allow whatever needs to come out to come. You don't have to understand it. You just have to feel it with your heart, because understanding comes after. Clarity arrives on its own. First comes vibration, and it is that vibration that transforms, like the breeze that can't be seen but moves everything. So if you felt moved by what you heard here, if something inside you was activated, if your eyes fill with tears, or if you simply feel a peace you can't explain, listen. Don't ignore it. It's your soul speaking to you. And if next dawn you wake up for no reason, you'll know what to do. It's not insomnia. It's not coincidence. It's a door. And on the other side, it's you. JACOBO GRINBERG said that the future of humanity depends on the expansion of consciousness. That it's not technology that will save us, but the depth of our inner connection. And you, with your silent prayer, with your candle lit, with your body in stillness, are part of that expansion. You are helping the world remember its essence. You are sowing beauty in a field that needs more light, more compassion, more truth. That is why, now more than ever, it's time to choose the frequency we want to live in. We can stay in haste, in disconnection, in appearance, or we can return to the essential. And that begins every time you sit in silence in the dark and say to yourself, "Here I am." There is no more powerful phrase, no clearer vibration. Because in that "here I am," everything fits. Your pain, your strength, your story, your desire to heal. All you are remembering. And before closing this video, I want to ask you something very special. If you made it this far, if you followed this journey with openness and an awakened heart, let us know. Write the word presence in the comments. That will be the secret key. That way, we'll know you're on this journey with us. That you're not just a spectator, but a conscious soul who chose to look beyond the surface. Also, you'll receive a special greeting in the next video. And if you want, share your experience. Have you ever prayed at dawn? Has that silence called you? What have you felt? This space is safe. It's yours. It's ours. And if this message touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe if you haven't yet and activate the bell, because many more videos like this are coming, where we'll explore the soul, the body, the energy, and the ways to heal from the deepest place. This is just the beginning, because the true journey is not in information, but in transformation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering.